So over the years, a great number of people have asked me my story about going from thinking to feeling. How did I go from being a man who was basically a brain on a stick, overthinking his way through life and overthinking every element in his life, to becoming a man who primarily, much of the time, has a well fleshed out emotional lexicon. I have a great connection with how I feel, and I can use feeling, intuition, and sensing as a way to move through the world, relate to people more deeply, and take decisions in my life. How did I undergo that transformation? And of course, men who ask me this are men on the same journey. I think most of us, every man in the modern world, is told some version of the story. Emotions and feeling that's not right, that's going to lead you somehow awry. What you want to do is be a rational man, a virtuous man, and therefore develop these mental faculties. So I'm going to tell the story of this transformation. It's a long transformation. It took a number of years. And what I'm about to say is not a prescription, it's not a method, but hopefully if you're interested, you might get something about the transition points, some of the practices and mindset shifts that I had along the way that might be directly useful to your own journey towards feeling. So before we start, it's worth saying a few words about my basic factory programming. I was born in Cambridge. I grew up in the outskirts of Oxford. So already the cultural water that I was swimming in was dense academia, the birthplace and the heart of rational, skeptical culture. My family was not a big academic family, so I was not beaten with a ruler and told to study in the encyclopedia and have tests, at dinner time with the parents. But nevertheless, I grew up in this cultural kind of mood, right? And a lot of my American counterparts actually say I grew up as a boy, and boys were told boys don't cry or men don't cry, that's just for girls. I didn't really have that kind of programming. I don't think it's the same, particularly in my region where I grew up, but we had an interesting programming where the girls were also not really encouraged to cry or be emotional either. In fact, anyone who had any kind of emotional feeling, parents, people at large would say, keep that undercover, stick it under the rug. No one wants to deal with your nasty human drama and your emotional runny nose. We like fun people. We like clever, witty, charming. Be like that. Be like that. Don't be dramatic. And so we would end up in our dramatics at 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and drink, of course, was in my era anyway, the national sport for opening up the world of emotions. Only under the influence can I, gain the amount of surrender required to share how I feel in the rest of my life to the people around me. So to be a good prototype of my culture, one had to do well at school, or be good at sport, or if all else failed, just be a good old boy and be a good friend and drink well and just be one of the lads. And that's how we're taught to be. So yeah, I grew up, and my teenage years were very much, I would have been this argumentative intellectual type. You see this in British politics. Here, now I'm going to explain to you why you are absolutely and incredibly wrong on this matter. And my friendships were based around this kind of awful, argumentative top dogging of each other. Yeah, so the ultimate form of British disembodiment was where I came from. Now, I had a little bit of an awakening when I was 17. Not an awakening in the sense of I was a prodigious mystic or anything like that, but really I had a series of experiences that flipped my entire paradigm of seeing the world and conceiving of myself on its head. It was really, really monumental. What happened at 17 was that I started to be invited to some parties and some music festivals and some of these enormous kind of all-night nightclubs, and also to some raves in the forest and in the woods. And there were one or two substances that were taken in these occasions. And I had a good group of friends. We were really on an adventure together, really united, and we experienced a number of mind and heart opening initiations in each other's company. And this flipped my mind, like to be there in an incredible music festival, surrounded by friends who, you know, all of a sudden were heartfelt allies for all of eternity. We just resonated on the same wavelength, and to be opened up, to have your mind and to have your heart open so widely, even though synthetically, was a peek, I guess, into what would be possible later on in the road. And it's not like I became more connected to my feeling and I got out of my head because I had these experiences. You know, I would be stuck in my head and my overthinking for many, many years after this, but it was a taste of a deeper way of conceiving of life. And in the next few years that followed, I developed a greater love of music and the arts. I developed a love for alternative cinema. So in particular, the deeply subconscious stuff of David Lynch and a lot of foreign films, people like Almodovar. All of a sudden, I was really drinking in and captivated by films that had more of a symbolic or an emotional quality to them. And then after that, I went traveling and spent some extended periods, particularly in Argentina. I lived a year there, immersed, and I went to live a long period also in Brazil and learnt the languages too. I was so motivated actually that if I would go to South America, this place where people are, the stereotype is people are not at all in their heads and they're very expressive and emotive, maybe some of that would rub off on me. And it did to some degree. And in fact, by learning foreign languages, I actually didn't just learn the technique and the vocabulary that would allow me to speak the languages themselves. In order to speak the languages with a sense of fluency, I had to develop within me an entire new speaker who could portray these languages. So it was a really interesting period of time where I developed a second self and a third self, to the point where, yeah, I'm dreaming every night in Spanish and Portuguese. When someone speaks to me in English, almost like my whole body stiffens and becomes someone old and someone different from the more suelta person who was, I lose my English language now I think about it, who was just more relaxed in the shoulders and the hips and had an easygoing way of expressing themselves. So I built different personas within me, different operating systems with different capacities, and it really, really helped my self-expression. And being immersed in these cultures showed me and gave me the permission to come from and speak from my heart and my joy and my enthusiasm more freely. Did it help me to go from thinking and overthinking to becoming man primarily of feeling? Like, did it help me to enrich my emotional intelligence? No, not at all. But I guess these are important steps along the way. So when I came back from traveling, I was in my mid-20s and I embarked upon a very, very serious and multi-year life coaching training. So I did a life coaching training 1 year, the next year I retook it, the next year deeper modules, an understanding again of the unconscious and how that's constructed with metaphor. I did a foundational year in transactional analysis, which is a very classical psychology that's used as a base for counseling and psychotherapy. And I would go and explore these really deep concepts about the human mind, human thought, and human transformation. And I was a student. I started to give sessions. I took a couple of apprenticeships. I was leading group workshops, and really my life started to coalesce and come into this field and this topic of human transformation. And I did a lot of work, very interesting. Life purpose, identity, beliefs and limiting beliefs, personal values, habits and habit change. And I thought that that should be enough to change my life. And in fact, with 4 years of doing very deep classical coaching, psychology in the transactional analysis realm, yeah, I started to unpack certain beliefs and see where they came from, and even start to peer into how my ego was constructed and what different drives and masks and aspects of my persona were trying to achieve. I got in touch with ulterior motivations, playing games, putting on social facades, but then trying to get needs met in ulterior ways. very good conceptual psychological basis was starting to open up in me, and that was becoming a tool for self-knowledge and also for my work. Did I manage to go from thinking to feeling and develop my emotional intelligence much in these years? No. Interestingly, no. There was very little practice or emphasis or opportunity to drop down through some kind of portal and start feeling my body and my emotions from the inside out. And it's very, very interesting that when I revisit concepts like identity and the structure and the nature of our identity and who we think we are and what a value is, why we value certain things and what does that feel like, and beliefs and obviously the embodied component of ego, I didn't discover that at the time. And now I see why so many people do life coaching or business coaching weekend workshops. They come out all pumped up with a new sense of corporate identity, or this is my life purpose or my life mission, and they write down some stellar sentences about it, but without any embodied component. It's just all thought-based, and some people can have some transformations from that, but it doesn't necessarily open up anything from the neck down. And I'm skipping forward a couple of years actually here, but at some point I went on a number of different Tantra workshops with a number of different teachers and in locations around the world, thinking that, wow, Tantra, it's all about the body and making love. Surely this is going to help me go from thinking to feeling, like it's going to change something. And you know what? Also there, I didn't come any closer to developing emotional intelligence or feeling myself from the inside out with Tantra. I found Tantra to be very good in terms of psychosexual awareness. So can I feel the moments and the reasons why my heart and my spirit and my generosity and my ability to be present with a lover will open? And do I notice the moments and the reasons that have me close off my heart? That was incredibly insightful knowledge to gain. And also more with my libido. So why is it sometimes that my sexual engine is revving very, very fast, and then something happens in the intimacy and then I close it all off and I lose any sense of sexual passion or drive? And again, gaining awareness on the dynamics that opened and closed my sexual desire was extremely interesting. And Tantra also helped me develop my 5 senses, so my vision, my ability to smell, taste, feel sensations and touch, and also hear things. So there was a lot of personal work that didn't necessarily have me go in and feel anymore. And yet all these things that I shared, from being 17, traveling, speaking a foreign language, life coaching and the concepts of psychology and change, to being a little bit more in my senses and slowing my head down a little bit and having more self-awareness, these all created a certain base or a certain vocabulary for me. And I'd done a lot of work at this point, but I was still very much this Oxford raised, head on a stick, wandering around the world, looking finally for the transformative technology that was going to have a deep impact. And I think I was so voracious at seeking because nothing I had done at that point got me further in touch with what was inside my body. So after all this prep work and maybe false starts and so on, like, what were the things that had me come more into my feeling? And so I think there are 3 very important things. And the first thing was, in my very late 20s, I started to be a lot more honest and a lot more real in my relationship to women. So before that point, I was very light, charming, sweet. I would have short and very ephemeral affairs with women. But when I started to share my truth, how much I was attracted, how much I loved, let's have an awkward talk about this thing that isn't working, I'm gonna leave you now, by facing everything from raw desire to heartbreak to, oh no, I've done something wrong, now I really have to hear her side of it and how I've created hurt, being in direct connection with somebody and taking stock of my actions and the dynamic between the two of us, that had me feel a hell of a lot. In fact, the amount of emotions that were brought up by relating deeply and more honestly with women was so substantial that my life became automatically a much more emotional affair. So rather than kind of watching on thinking, yeah, actors in Almodovar's movies or, you know, the people of Brazil, they're all emotional and expressive and I'm not, I found myself in the center of the most incredible emotional drama, and it was my life and it was my relationships. So I maybe didn't gain more emotional intelligence at this point, but certainly the full-bodied, visceral, heartbreaking, heart-elating roller coaster ride of love and relationship, that started to open stuff up and really have me feel deeply. And in that period I started to write a little bit more and just noticed that I liked to play with words and that I had a lot of emotional things to say. There was so much going on in my life. Now, a little while after that, the second thing was that with a few friends, we all kind of reached a point in our personal growth and development where we realized that to go any further, we needed to ask for and give each other really honest, direct feedback. Now, of course, most friendships in the world are based on amplifying the good feelings that your friend has, helping them through a bad moment. Oh, don't worry, bro, you'll get back on your horse, everything will be fine. And generally having a sense of entertainment and helping. It's kind of most conventional friendship is a conspiracy to keep us all in the light and the easy and the fun, and to keep us all away from looking at anything scary or dangerous or dark. What comes to mind right now is the Truman Show, if you've seen this, and every time Truman's about to discover something new about the nature of his world, which of course is a prison, his buddy shows up with a 6-pack of beer and gives him some, heartfelt, funny jibes about, yeah, Truman, just chill out. Don't try and awaken. Stay here and drink with me and stay asleep in your easy little town and don't worry about what's out there, or don't worry about your underworld. But I developed in this period of time friendships of feedback, which are friendships of virtue and friendships of honor. And we would travel and spend time together and hang out and talk about our love lives and our growth and our career. And every time a friend saw something in me, or I saw something in him that maybe wasn't serving him, he was operating with maybe he was a little bit out of integrity, or he's clearly wearing a mask, or he could have been more authentic and he wasn't, or he was doing some kind of strategy in dating that obviously the woman with him didn't like, but he couldn't see it because he just got so excited by the moment and unconscious in that moment. We would give really pinpoint, accurate, no holds barred feedback. When you did that, this is what I saw. I know why your affair with that woman shattered, because I could see this coming and this coming, and you said this, and I could feel what was going in your mind was that, and I know that. And so we started to turn towards each other in these friendships of feedback. And of course, what was important is that we had a hell of a lot of true brotherly love for each other. It takes a hell of a lot of safety and respect to have this conversation, because it's like, Jordan, you've been doing this behavior for 30 years. All of a sudden, I'm going to point you out to yourself and make it very, very clear to you how your ordinary modus operandi in relationships and the world turns a lot of people off and does you more harm than good. You can't see it, but you're going to see it by the end of this conversation. And we got into that mode, and it was incredibly, incredibly developmental. And I don't think I ever grew so quickly in my life. And the reason why this helped me go from thinking to feeling is because I started to gain exterior perspectives on myself. And every time I had to rub up against my own inauthenticity and people calling me out on my falseness, when they shone on me the light of truth about how I was really showing up, that was a very emotional thing. And what would then surface would be embarrassment, guilt, Shame. I mean, sure, I might try and defend myself or justify myself, but when my friends didn't allow me to try and explain my behavior and just feel the visceral emotional impacts of the feedback, it really cut me open. And so a lot of the kind of plates and crust that was holding my psyche and my social persona together for many, many years, under the truth of my friends and with their brotherly love, of course, that started to come off. And I became more honest, more authentic, more open. And with that, it was a lot more vulnerable because I had to start feeling a lot of the feelings that were beneath. And some of those things might be from fiery rage all the way to deepest shame, like, oh my God, if I speak this next sentence, all of my friends are going to be so disgusted by me that they're never going to want to speak to me ever again. And then the miracle of having really strong friendships of feedback, friendships of virtue in this sense, is when I reveal the nasty little secret that I've been carrying my entire life within me, and I feel toxic shame about holding this secret. When my friends reflect back to me, I'm so glad you told us this, it helps me understand you more. I feel much more connected to you. My heart is like open and so beautiful that you trust us enough to share that. And I'm like, you're not going to disown me and run away from me forever. My friends are like, no, actually, we all like you more. We want to lean in and come close to you. This is the kind of dynamic that heals the most toxic aspects of shame that we carry. Even though I think some of the things about me, my persona, my character, my past, my emotional world are too bad to bear, even though I want to run away from myself when I feel these things inside of me and have these memories inside of me, and I see myself in the mirror of truth with these things all happening, my best friends around me, they won't run away. And that's a mind-bending shift in truth. Wow, maybe it's not so bad. Healing takes place. A sense of self-love starts to come through. So in this kind of process, emotions came up and came to the fore, and I would be able to say, yeah, this is fear, this is shame, this is grief. And my friends would help me to put words on the emotions as well, became to articulate them more and gain a living, present moment emotional vocabulary. So yeah, second thing, friendships of virtue, deep, honest, intimate relationships with romantic and sexual partners, friendships of virtue. And the third thing that really made a difference was around this time, I attended a number of little workshops just to test them out. You know, it was very exploratory at that time. Radical honesty was one of them. Non-violent communication, dived in just a little bit into that. Authentic relating was starting to become a thing. And within all of that, there was a practice called circling, which you may have heard of. And these practices were places that I could go to and really test out the things that I was discovering in my friendships of feedback. And we would speak with strangers, or we would build a sense of group safety in the workshop, and someone would share their truth, and we would be hanging with them. So when the crust of their personality kind of came off or was reflected back to them in some truth-telling thing, and they would start to feel the emotions underneath, the group would hold space so they could go through that. And for the next 3 years, I would say, all of 2014, 15, and 16, my life was put on hold. I flew basically around the world, and I went to every single retreat that I could afford to go to that was led by somebody who was, let's say, integrally informed. And that means they're working with integral philosophy, they're working with different states of meditation and consciousness, they're working with these relational practices of speaking raw truth to each other in a compassionate way. They're working with shadow work, and they're working with really well-tuned emotional awareness. And I did workshop after workshop. I did teacher training, leadership training, train the trainer type stuff. I spent a year doing an apprenticeship with a woman who was pioneering her own technology, her own integral technology of this sort. And it was just, I quit everything in my life so I could do this. So I was going there anyway, this journey from thinking to feeling, but now I'd really prioritized, no, I'm on the feeling train. I'm doing this. And so that's an immense amount of inner work. And I think as a coaching professional, I was offering coaching for maybe 5 or 6 years, 7 years, before ever getting to this direct truth-telling component with my clients, and before even being able to feel and unpick and unfold emotional content in the middle of a session. And as soon as I started to be able to do that, all of a sudden, I wasn't just coaching from an analytic kind of goal setting or feedback kind of way. We started to have coaching that was healing. Old, stuck emotions could come to the fore. Even trauma could come up, be felt, be shared, witness compassion. And so the depth of transformation, actually the depth of humanity that was getting cultivated in these conversations really, really grew. Now, after about 3 years studying and practicing intensely in this kind of workshops, I burnt out. And what I had actually done was I built around me a massive community of practitioners who are all deeply involved in going from thinking to feeling, or, you know, awakening integrally, whatever that means. And so a lot of my personal life and a lot of my personal growth life were all tied together in some of these communities. And I just decided that enough was enough, and I had landed in some very difficult inner personal terrain, and I needed some help to figure that out. So I took a step back from these crazy practices. I did some really good, solid base level shadow work that helped me make sense of some of the really wacky things that I'd seen and felt along the way. And I started, and this is 5 years and counting now, I started migrating my feeling practice or my embodied practice to more of what you would call somatic work or daily embodied practice, which is at home, in my room, doing my own thing. So not yoga, not qigong. I've got a variety of different things that I do with my body that serve as an ongoing gradual deepening into the realm of feeling within myself, and as a daily hygiene. So you brush and you floss your teeth at the end of every day, right? What if you also do a little bit of breath work or a little bit of movement just to feel what's alive in your body, and if anything's getting a little bit stuck in there, there's something you haven't processed, or something is niggling you or annoying you, or there's a feeling state of any kind, what if I spend a few minutes just moving and breathing? Can I feel that? Can I let that process have its way? Can I release it a little bit? Great, I come back to a state of equanimity at the end of it. And so rather than pausing my life and going on 3 years of retreat so I can have all kinds of awakening and all kinds of wild feeling states, I've cultivated over the last 5 years a lifestyle where in 10 or 15 minutes a day at home, I can come back to myself, check in with what's there, and just keep my feeling capacity slowly and subtly over time broadening and growing. A lot of us, though, we need that moment of, wow, I'm starting to see myself in the mirror. My friends and my partners are now becoming honest enough about where I'm difficult to deal with. I've located within myself some shadow, some wounding. I don't know how to do that work myself. Therefore, I must go on a retreat and crack myself open. It's a phase, and it can be needed at times. And I will say that in terms of going from thinking to feeling, what I needed, I believe we all have a center of gravity, a developmental center of gravity. What kind of consciousness do you live in, and what kind of consciousness do your actions in the world come from? And your relationships, where do they stem from, right? And the first step is absolute unconsciousness. You are just the product of your culture, doing the things that your culture expected of you. Then you might go into personal development and start setting goals for your life, start being a bit more accountable, start trying to consciously improve things. You then might go a layer deeper and start asking yourself, what are my blockages here? What is going on in my psyche? How am I creating difficulties for myself? And then you start to unpack what your personality and your ego is made out of. And then even deeper than that is the layer of, okay, once I start plucking away my ego, boom, now I'm left in the volcanic lava layer underneath. Pure emotion, pure id, pure rage, horniness, emotional vulnerability, longing to connect and be seen, hurt, direct trauma and wounds, all the emotions that were never felt, in your childhood, the grief of what it is to be a human being alive in the world today. All these kinds of things become alive. And so to go from being a guy who was fundamentally, ricocheting around because of my ego, to then starting to look at and understand my ego, to then being a person who was really awash in this territory of emotions, I needed to maybe crack open 4 or 5 of my key ego defenses. Once I got a hold of maybe 4 or 5 of the main ways that I was wearing a mask, keeping other people at bay, avoiding every time an emotion would come up, every time I got caught in one of those ego defenses, once I kind of unpicked and unplugged 4 or 5 of those, I didn't have any cover or mask over my vulnerability anymore. And with those gone, it just liberated my ego so that I could be much more in this realm of emotions. So yeah, it's a long trajectory of development that I'm spending out. But those are the things to watch out for. We often need direct help from someone who loves us, someone who knows us, someone who's willing to speak truth to us, plus a container of their compassion and their curiosity, so that those initial pieces of the ego can come off, and then we really get to process the feeling that's underneath. Now, a lot of men wonder, and I think it's really important to say, because men's work and men's emotional work is now heralded as this really important thing. And so a lot of men are venturing into this territory with a lot of gusto, doing whatever they can to crack open and feel their emotions underneath. And a lot of men start delving into this layer of feeling and emotionality and start running their life from feeling first. And you'll know if you're here because you wake up in the morning, you have work to do. Yeah, I don't really feel aligned with that today. Or someone asks you, how are you? Yeah, it's so interesting that you ask. I'm feeling a little bit like this, and then I'm feeling a little bit like this, and then there's this kind of tingling sensation in my belly. And I had this dream last night. You start hearing men speak like this. Or then you start having the, I'm going to quit my job and I'm just going to surrender to what life wants through me. And life is just like unprocessed emotion at some point. You know that you don't want to fit into the kind of false, sterile matrix world that you were living in before. But yeah, I just want to, I'm going to check in with my feeling every day and see what I'm aligned with. And then I'm only going to act from, emotional or feeling-based alignment. And then men go out into the world and live their lives like this. And this is what I was principally doing when I said I spent 3 years going to every retreat I could, every excuse to work with a master and deepen further into this layer of feeling process to continue my process of awakening, right? But feeling is not the ultimate layer, right? To go from thinking to feeling, or to go from defense, psychological defense, or to go from ego to process is not the final layer. And my experience is when I sit with somebody, and when I've sat with myself, and the charge and the urgency of emotional life clears, emotions will always transmute into something else, and they will transmute into presence. So if you imagine the ego as a solid rock, the emotional life as kind of molten lava, fluid, moving, then as this texture evaporates, it goes into a gas. And I think our emotional life starts off, it's solid and protected as a rock, and we clamp down so our emotions never move and never have to move and never be seen. And we live in our heads as a way to compensate for the inner pain for that, actually. and that energy is locked up. We don't have the energy in our life. It's just a subconscious block. Once we put awareness on that and start to feel that block, it melts into lava. And a man whose feeling of himself is molten lava always, is constantly in flow. It's very hard to pin him down to something. It is very hard for him to want to pin himself down to everything. So he comes to places like Bali or Tulum or Koh Phangan or Goa or some of the big spiritual scenes in the world. He wants to be around people that are also in process. But that process doesn't last forever. You do enough emotional work and the emotions will start to boil up and turn into a kind of gas. And at a psychological level, this is where you sit on your meditation pillow and you feel peace. It's not, I'm going to meditate and try and find peace because I don't like my emotions, so I'm going to try and train myself through meditation to dissociate from being a body. But it's more, I sat with my full emotional wealth so many times and for so long that these emotions kind of boiled off. And now, instead of rampant sexual desire, I just have a sense of simmering, easy passion, rather than feeling grief and sadness all the time. A lot of men come to me and say, how do I move forward in my life? When really my truth is that I feel really, really, sad, and that's my obstacle. Well, if you sit with sadness and grief long enough, it tenderizes the heart and opens up into a sense of compassion. So all the spiritual virtues of the ages are all available on the other side of going deep into every emotional rabbit hole possible. And I think over the last couple of years, I've started to come out of this life as being this moving emotional process a lot of the time. And I feel myself in different kind of sublime states of presence. Instead of where I used to have an emotion, I have just an easy, gaseous kind of openness. So particularly if you're a man in the world, and particularly if you're a man in your 40s and your 50s, you've got a family you're holding together, you've got a company that you're holding together, your wife is going on to you about being more emotionally available. You know in your company that if you can only connect more with the feelings of the younger staff members, they're going to feel more trust and more care from you, and it's going to help the culture of your company develop. You know that there's some feeling work that you have to do, but you're worried of the men's group in the woods stereotype that if you do start feeling your feelings, you're going to end up in green elephant pants and running around Thailand for the next 3 years, unable to get out of that depth. And I think if you pick your way through your interior in a careful way, you do good practice, and particularly you do a kind of 10-15 minutes a day home practice, you do some good coaching/shadow work on your emotions along the way, you can do this journey from unawareness to ego awareness to emotional awareness down into presence and true virtue without getting too derailed by this wild emotional opening. And it's amazing that when a man does change his operating system from being primarily all about thinking to all about feeling, the most logical thing in the world to do is to quit everything and go to a place that's aligned with your heart. Well, after you've ran around the world doing things that are aligned and that feel good and that resonate, you land in a deeper place again, which is, now I know what I'm most deeply committed to. And it doesn't matter what my feelings are on a particular day, I'm still going to knuckle down and follow through with my devotion. But you do this from a place, importantly, not of, I reject my feelings because I want to knuckle down and be the man and go through. You do this from a place of, I have an entire lexicon, rich in a vocabulary of feelings, and I can feel all of those feelings, and still I feel a deeper ground in me that has me able to give something powerful, stable, and consistent back into the world, to my family, to my work, to my art, to my community, and so on. So I'm a stand for men doing their emotional work in a way that recognizes that beneath emotions, there's a deeper well of presence. So how can we do very good emotional work and then come to the presence beneath? I hope this has helped. I've got a number of other videos on my channel on topics similar to this, men's emotional, energetic circuitry and wiring, what it's like to awaken the different virtues and different emotions in the body. If you want a guided tour through this terrain, I have an online course. It's on demand. It's called Lover, Outlaw, Trickster, Magician. It's a full-scale embodiment and archetypes course. We have a full gamut of different emotional practices that you can do. And I'm available. So if you want more of my work, to follow me, book a call or whatever, just look in the description below. All the links are there. Thanks for listening. I'm Jordan. I hope to see you in a future video.